Good morning, boys and girls. This is chapter 4, Where the Red Fern Grows. Day after day, I flew to the store. Grandpa would shake his head. Then on a Monday, as I entered the store, I sensed a change in him. He was in high spirits, talking and laughing with half a dozen farmers. Every time I caught his eye, he would smile and wink at me. I thought the farmers would never leave, but finally the store was empty. Grandpa told me the letter had come. The kennels were still there, and they had dogs for sale. He said he had made the mail buggy wait while he made out the order. And another thing, the dog market had gone downhill. The price of dogs had dropped $5. He handed me a $10 bill. Now, there's still one stump in the way, he said. The mail buggy doesn't carry things like dogs, so they'll come as far as the depot in Tahlequah, but you'll need to get the notice here because I ordered them in your name. I thanked my grandfather with all my heart and asked him how long I'd have to wait for the notice. He said, I don't know, but it shouldn't take more than a couple weeks. I asked how I was going to get my dogs out of Tahlequah. Well, there's always somebody going in, he said, and you can ride in with them. That evening, the silence of our supper was interrupted when I asked my father this question. Papa, how far is it to Kentucky? I may as well have exploded a bomb. For an instant, there was complete silence, and then my oldest sister giggled. The two little ones stared at me. With a half-hearted laugh, my father said, Well, now, I don't know, but it's a pretty good ways. What do you want to know? That for? Thinking of taking a trip to Kentucky? No, I said. I just wondered. My youngest sister giggled and asked, Can I go with you? I glared at her. Mama broke into the conversation. I declare, what kind of question is that? How far is it to Kentucky? I don't know what's gotten into that mind of yours lately. You go around like you're lost and you're losing weight. You're as skinny as a rail, and look at that hair. Just last Sunday they had a haircutting at Tom Rollins' place, but you couldn't go. You had to go prowling around the river in the woods. So this was at a time when, especially where they live, that you'd have like a traveling haircut person, and they would come to like all the different communities. You couldn't just go to like the nearest barber shop. There wasn't one where they live. I told Mama that I'd get a haircut the next time they had a cutting. And I just heard some fellas talking about Kentucky up at the store, and I wondered how far it was. Much to my relief, the conversation was ended. The days dragged by. A week passed and still no word about my dogs. Terrible thoughts ran through my mind. Maybe my dogs were lost. The train had a wreck. Someone stole my money. Or perhaps the mailman lost my order. Then, at the end of the second week, the notice came. My grandfather told me that he had talked to Jim Hodges that day. He was going into town in about a week, and I could ride in with him to pick up my dogs. Again, I thanked my grandfather. I started for home. Walking along in deep thought, I decided it was time to tell my father the whole story. I fully intended to tell him that evening. I did try several times, but somehow I just couldn't. I wasn't scared of him because he never whipped me or anything like that. He was always kind and gentle, but for some reason, I don't know why, I just couldn't tell him. That night, snuggled deep into the soft folds of my feather bed, I lay thinking. I had waited so long for my dogs, and I so desperately wanted to see them and hold them. I didn't want to wait a whole week. In a flash, I made up my mind. Very quietly, I got up and put on my clothes. I sneaked into the kitchen and got one of Mama's precious flour sacks. In it, I put 6 eggs, some leftover cornbread, and a little salt and a few matches. Next, I went to the smokehouse and cut off a piece of salt pork. I stopped at the barn and picked up a gunny sack. Put the flour sack inside the gunny sack. This I rolled up and crammed lengthwise into the bib of my overalls. I was on my way. I was going to go get my dogs. Tahlequah was a small country town with a population of about 800. By the road, it was 32 miles away, but as the crow flies, it was only 20 miles. I went as the crow flies, straight through the hills. As the crow flies, like a road can be windy, but as the crow flies means straight through the woods. Although I had never been to town in my life, I knew what direction to take. Tahlequah and the railroad lay on the other side of the river from our place. I had the Frisco Railroad on my right and the Illinois River on my left. Not far from where the railroad crossed the river lay the town of Tahlequah. I knew if I bore to the right, I'd find the railroad, and if I bore to the left, I'd have the river to guide me. Sometime that night, I crossed the river in a riffle somewhere in the Dripping Springs country. Coming out of the river bottoms, I scattered up the long hog-back ridge and broke out in the top of the flats. In a mile-eating trot, I moved along. I had the wind of a deer, the muscles of a country boy, and a heart full of dog love and strong determination. I wasn't scared of the darkness or the mountains, for I was raised in these mountains. On and on, mile after mile, I moved along. I saw faint gray streaks appear in the east. I knew daylight was close. My bare feet were getting sore from the flint rocks and sawbriars. I stopped beside a mountain stream, soaked my feet in the cool water, rested for a spell, and then started back on. After leaving the mountain stream, my pace was much slower. The muscles of my legs were getting really stiff. Feeling the pangs of hunger gnawing at my stomach, I decided I'd stop and eat at the next stream I found. But then I remembered I'd forgotten a can in which to boil my eggs. I stopped and built a small fire. Cutting off a nice thick slab of salt pork, I roasted it, and with a piece of cornbread made a sandwich. Putting out my fire, I was on my way again. I ate as I trotted along. I felt much better then. I came into Tahlequah from the northeast. At the outskirts of town, I hid my flour sack and provisions, keeping the gunny sack, and then I walked into town. I was scared of Tahlequah and the people. I had never seen such a big town and so many people. There was store after store, some of them 2 stories high. The wagon yard had wagons on top of wagons, teams, buggies, and horses. 2 young ladies about my age stopped, stared at me, and then giggled. My blood boiled, but I could understand. After all, I had 3 sisters, and they were giggling all the time, too. So I just went on. I saw a big man coming up the street. The bright, shiny star on his vest looked as big as a bucket. I saw the long, black gun at his side, and I froze in my tracks. I heard of sheriffs and marshals, but I had never seen one. Stories repeated about them in the mountains and how fast they were with a gun and how many men they had killed. The closer he came, the more frightened I got. I just knew it was the end for me. I could just see him aiming his big black gun and shooting me right between the eyes. It seemed like a miracle that he passed by, hardly glancing at me. Breathing a sigh of relief, I walked on, seeing the wonders of the world. Passing a large store window, I stopped and stared. There in the window was the most wonderful sight that I had ever seen. Everything under the sun. Overalls, jackets, beautiful bolts of beautiful cloth, new harnesses, collars, bridles, and then my eyes really did pop open. There were several guns, and one of them had 2 barrels. I couldn't believe it. 2 barrels! I had seen several guns in my life, but never one with 2 barrels. And then I saw something else. The sun was just right, and the plate glass was a perfect mirror. I saw the reflection of myself for the first time in my life. Let me read that again in case you didn't catch that. I saw the full reflection of myself for the first time in my life. Imagine being, I think he's like 12 or 13. Imagine being 12 or 13 and never saw yourself before in a mirror. Wow, that'd be pretty amazing. I could see that I did look a little odd. My straw-colored hair was long and shaggy, and it brushed out like a corn tassel that had been hit by the wind. I tried to smooth it down with my hands. It helped some, but not much. What I needed was a good combing, and I had no comb. My overalls were patched and faded, but they were clean. My shirt had pulled out. I tucked it back in. I took one look at my bare feet and winced. They were as brown as dead sycamore leaves. A spider web pattern of raw, red scratches looked odd in the saddle brown skin. I thought, well, I won't have to pick any more blackberries and the scratches will soon go away. I pumped up one of my arms and thought surely the muscle was going to pop right out through my thin blue shirt. I stuck out my tongue. It was as red as a pokeberry juice, and anything that color was supposed to be healthy. After making a few faces at myself, I put my thumbs in my ears and was making mule ears when 2 old women came by. They stopped and stared at me, but I stared back. As they turned to go on their way, I heard one of them say something to the other. The words were hard to catch, but I did hear one word. Wild. I couldn't help grinning. They sounded just like Mama. As I turned to leave, my eyes again fell on the overalls and the bolts of cloth. I thought of my mother, father, and sisters. Here was an opportunity to make amends for leaving home without telling anyone. I entered the store. I bought a pair of overalls for Papa. After telling the storekeeper how big my mother and sisters were, I bought several yards of cloth. I also bought a large sack of candy. Glancing down at my bare feet, the storekeeper said, "I got some good shoes back here." I told him I didn't need any shoes. He asked if that would be all. I nodded. He added up the bill. I handed him my $10, and he gave me my change. After wrapping the bundles, he helped me put them in my sack. Lifting it to my shoulder, I turned and left the store. Out on the street, I picked out a friendly-looking old man and asked him where the depot was. He told me to go down to the last street and turn right, go as far as I could, and I couldn't miss it. I thanked him, and I started on my way. Leaving the main part of town, I started up a long street through a residential section. I had never seen so many beautiful houses, and they were all different colors. The lawns were neat and clean and looked like green carpets. I saw a man pushing some kind of mowing machine. I stopped to watch the whirling blades. He gawked at me, so I hurried on. I heard a lot of shouting and laughing ahead of me. Not wanting to miss anything, I walked a little faster. I saw what was making the noise. More kids than I had ever seen were playing around a big red brick building. I thought some rich man lived there, and he was giving a party for his children. Walking up to the edge of the playground, I stopped to watch. The boys and girls were about my age and were as thick as flies around a sorghum mill. They were milling, running, jumping. Teeter-totters and swings were loaded down with them. Everyone was laughing and having a big time. Over against the building, a large blue pipe ran out on an angle from the ground. A few feet from the top, there was a bend in it. The pipe seemed to go into the building. Boys were crawling into its dark mouth. I counted 9 of them. One boy stood about 6 feet from the opening with a stick in his hand. Staring goggle-eyed, trying to figure out what they were doing, I got a surprise. Out of the hollow pipe spurted a boy. He sailed through the air and lit on his feet. The boy with the stick marked the ground where he landed. All 9 of them came shooting out, one behind the other. As each boy landed, a new mark was scratched. They ganged around, looking at the lines. There was a lot of loud talking, pointing, and arguing. Then all the lines were erased, and a new scorekeeper was picked out. The others crawled back into the pipe. I figured out how the game was played then. After climbing to the top of the slide, the boys turned around and sat down. One at a time, they came flying down and out, feet first. The one that shot the farthest was a winner. Oh, I thought how wonderful it would be if I could slide down just one time. One boy, spying me on the corner, came over. Looking me up and down, he said, "Do you go to school here?" I said, "School?" He said, "Sure, school. What'd you think this was?" "Oh, no, I don't go to school here." "Do you go to Jefferson?" "No, I don't go there either." "Don't you go to school at all?" "Sure, I go to school." "Where?" "At home." "You go to school at home." I nodded. "What grade are you in?" I said I wasn't in any grade. Puzzled, he said, "You go to school at home, and you don't know what grade you're in. Who teaches you?" "My mother." "Well, what does she teach you?" I said, "Reading, writing, and arithmetic, and I bet I'm just as good at it as you are." He asked, "Don't you have any shoes?" I said, "Sure, I have shoes." "Why aren't you wearing them?" "I don't really wear shoes until it gets cold." He laughed and asked where I lived. I said, "Back in the hills." He said, "Oh, so you're a hillbilly." He ran back to the mob. I saw him pointing at me and talking to several boys. They started my way, yelling, "Hillbilly, hillbilly." Just before they reached me, a bell started ringing. Turning, they ran to the front of the building, lined up in 2 long lines, and like little tin soldiers disappeared inside the school. The playground was silent. I was all alone and felt lonely and sad. I heard a noise on my right. I didn't have to turn around to recognize what it was. Someone was using a hoe. I know that sound if I heard it on a dark night. It was a little old white-headed woman working in a flower bed. Looking again at the long blue pipe, I thought, there's no one around. Maybe I could just have one slide anyway. I eased over and looked up into the dark hollow. It looked scary, but I thought of all the other boys I'd seen crawl into it. I could see the last mark on the ground, and I thought, I bet I could beat that. Laying my sack down, I started climbing up. The farther I went, the darker and more scary it got. Just as I reached the top, my feet slipped. Down I sailed. All the way down, I tried to grab onto something, but there was nothing to grab. I'm sure some great champions had slid out of that pipe. and no doubt that more than one world record had been broken. But if someone had been there when I came out, I know the record would stand today in all its glory. I came out just like I went in, feet first and belly down. My legs were spread out like a bean shooter stalk. Arms flailing in the air, I zoomed out and up. I seemed to hang suspended in the air at the peak of my climb. I could see the hard-packed ground far below. As I started down, I shut my eyes and gritted my teeth. This didn't seem to help much. With a splattering sound, I landed. I felt the air whoosh out from my teeth. I tried to scream, but I had no wind left to make a sound. So if you've ever had the wind knocked out of you, that's what happened here. After bouncing a couple times, I finally settled down to earth. I lay spread-eagled for a few seconds and then slowly got to my knees. Hearing loud laughter, I looked around. It was the little old lady with the hoe in her hand. She hollered and asked how I liked it. Without answering, I grabbed up my gunny sack and left. Far up the street, I looked back. The little old lady was sitting down, rocking with laughter. I couldn't understand these townspeople. They weren't staring at a fellow, they were laughing at him. Chapter 5, he arrives at the depot to pick up his dogs. So we'll find out what happens tomorrow. All right, see you guys later.